I think most of us have heard about Al Capone in one way or another. This man was and still is the most famous gangster in history. The man who was the king of Chicago, and without a doubt the most powerful gangster in this city, and perhaps the most powerful in the history of any city. Let's watch today's video about the history of Al Capone and the exciting events that led him to the keys of power and wealth, and how was the unfortunate and tragic end of the person who lived most of his life as the most powerful gangster in history. Welcome, my friends, to Clear and Simple. Today, our topic is about one of the most famous figures in history, the great mafia leader Alphonse Gabriel Capone, and some call him Scarface. Since he was young, he showed signs that his future would be different from any other child, but his upbringing was somewhat very normal. His family was of Italian origin, like most mafia members. But his family moved to live in America in 1894. They moved to New York City specifically. Al Capone was not born yet, and was born there in New York in 1899. His family was quite large. He had 6 brothers and 2 sisters, and the brothers in particular would play an important role in his life as a gangster, because the Italian mafia is always about families that put family above everything else to some extent, of course, because the eldest brother, whose name was Richard, would become a police officer and would give up his family name, the name Capone, in order to separate himself from his brother Capone and his other brothers who had taken the path of gangs and crime. The important thing is that Al Capone, since he was young, showed signs that this boy was a different person. Since he was young, he was forming a gang with other boys to beat up the boys of other neighborhoods. Of course, their neighborhood was full of families of Italian origin, meaning it was an Italian neighborhood, and there were always problems between them and the other neighborhoods, especially the Irish neighborhoods inhabited by families of Irish origin. There were always problems between the Italians and the Irish, whether at the neighborhood level or even at the gang level. One of the situations that he remembers from when he was young is that once there was an old woman from whom the Irish boys stole a washboard. So the young Al Capone went and gathered his gang of neighborhood boys and led them to retrieve the washboard from the Irish boys, meaning he went to their neighborhood, to their home, and he actually managed to return the washboard to the old woman after returning to the neighborhood in a great procession in which he boasted about himself and his achievement in front of everyone. Since he was young, he had leadership skills, but the problem was that he loved to show off, he loved to brag, and this was one of the things that would cause big problems in the future. One of the incidents that I also remember from him when he was young, and which was a big turning point in his life, is that when he was 14 years old, he hit his teacher. I don't know why, maybe there was a problem between them and a quarrel, and he was angry, and he decided to beat her up, a severe beating. After this incident, he was expelled from school, and this was a big turning point in his life. After he was expelled, he went to his parents and told them, "I'm not good at studying. I want to live in real life. I want to start working and start being myself." Of course, his mother and father had no control over anything, meaning this boy can't put it in his head and decide what to do. He will do it. And you have to understand something else. Italian families in general, at that time, were treated as a lower class of society, meaning even the neighborhood they lived in was considered a poor to middle-class neighborhood. They were not poor and destitute, but they did not have a good standard of living. On the other side, up the hill, were the upscale areas, the areas where the Al Capone family and their likes, Italian immigrants and others, were not even allowed to enter these areas where the noble families lived, the wealthy families like the Rockefeller family. Rockefeller was the king of oil in America, and he was considered the richest man in modern times without competition. Al Capone saw such wealthy people, and he dreamed and wondered, why I'm not like them. Why do they alone have all this wealth and money? I want to be like them. And he decided that he would finally achieve this goal by any means. He would become a wealthy man and prove his position in society. Al Capone dropped out of school at the age of 14 and started working in normal jobs here and there. He worked in a library, worked in a factory, and worked in a restaurant. But he was not fixed on a job. He was either fired because of his harsh nature and violence, or he left the job after a while after he got bored of it. But one of the jobs he worked was as a bouncer for a bar called the Harvard and owned by a person or gangster named Frankie Yale. This was the door through which Al Capone entered the world of gangs and organized crime. The important thing is that during Al Capone's work, this bar owned by Frankie Yale happened to be a situation that left a big impact on his life. Literally a big impact on his face, and was the reason for one of Al Capone's nicknames that gave him great prestige in his life, which was the nickname Scarface. Because the Capone had 3 big scars on the left side of his face. These scars were traces of wounds caused by one of the people during his work in the bar when he was 18 years old. What happened is that our friend the Capone saw a girl in the bar, a girl named Lena, and he liked her and tried to get close to her and flirt with her. He tried the first time and couldn't get her attention, so he tried again, and this time he said a bad word to her meaning, "Dear, you have a beautiful," and I mean this thing as a compliment. He said it with more bad words and in a loud voice so that everyone around them heard him. This girl was with her brother, and when her brother heard the statement from Al Capone, he got angry at him and got up and pulled out a knife, and a violent fight started between them. And during this fight, the brother Al Capone suffered 3 wounds, 2 in his face and 1 in his neck on the left side. And these wounds left permanent scars on Al Capone's face and would accompany him for the rest of his life and would give him the nickname Scarface, a nickname that, by the way, Al Capone hated so much that he would put powder on his face to hide the scars, and he always preferred to take pictures of the right side of his face. Or even when asked about the scars, he would say that they were marks from wounds he had sustained in the war. The important thing is that during this period in which Al Capone worked in the bar, he was considered one of the members of the Frankie Yale gang and was doing simple criminal acts here and there. But later during that period, he joined another gang. He joined a gang called the 5 Points Gang. This gang was led by the famous American gangster Johnny Torrio. This was one of the most important people in Al Capone's life. This man was his teacher and leader, and then he would become his right hand, and they would climb the ladder of power and wealth together. Until in the end, Al Capone inherited his huge empire from him. Remember his name well? Johnny Torrio. When Al Capone joined Johnny Torrio and his gang, the 5 Points Gang, he began to commit bigger criminal acts and use more violence. During this period, he became a professional in using knives, pistols, and weapons in general, and his affairs were going well with his new gang. But after that, when he reached the age of 19, a big change occurred in his life. Al Capone loved a girl named May Coughlin and decided to marry her, even though this girl was of Irish origin. As we said at the beginning, the Italians and the Irish always had problems between them, but love and what it does. The important thing is that within a short period, his wife gave birth to his first son. His name is Albert Francis Capone, known as Sonny, born on December 4th, 1918. Here, Al Capone's life entered a new turn, and he decided to stay away from gang life. That is, he felt that he had become a man with a family and responsibilities and decided to try to live an upright life. He decided to try the honest life for a while. He and his small family, his wife and son, actually moved to a new place far from their old neighborhood, and he worked for a while as an accountant for one of the small companies. Things were somewhat stable during that short period, but a person like Al Capone could never have a quiet or normal life. Impossible. What happened not long after that was that his father died of a heart attack, and naturally, Al Capone returned to the Brooklyn area where his family lived to attend the funeral. But when he saw the situation of his family and knew that his father's death would make them live in a very difficult situation, he knew that they needed him more than ever before. For Al Capone, the family is something sacred. It is impossible for him to let them suffer, and for him, his wife, and his child to return and live his normal, calm life as if nothing had happened. It is impossible for him to abandon his mother, brothers, and sisters when they need him. Although he was not the eldest brother, Al Capone was the fourth brother in line with his brothers, but he took it upon himself to help his family in this difficult time they were going through. But at the same time, her young job was as an accountant, and the small salary he received would not be enough for his small and large family at the same time. He had to find a different way. Here he had no choice but to return once again to gangs and illegal activities. Of course, when Al Capone decided to return to gang business, he immediately went to the leader and great inspiration Johnny Torrio, who in turn welcomed his return and was happy with it. At that time, Johnny Torrio was working under the banner of a major mafia leader named Big Jim Colosimo. This Big Jim, he was a heavyweight leader. I mean, that's it from the people at the top. The business he was working in was focused on gambling and prostitution in the city of Chicago. Johnny Torrio moved to Chicago to work for Big Jim and invited Al Capone to join him and move from New York to Chicago. Indeed, Al Capone packed his bags and took his wife and son with him and moved to Chicago, the city where he built his history and all his glories. Al Capone was Johnny Torrio's right-hand man. Johnny Torrio was also the right-hand man of the big mafia boss, Big Jim Colosimo. The gang's business was expanding dramatically. The main credit goes to Johnny Torrio and Al Capone and their strong and fast methods in managing all operations and solving any problems they faced quickly and violently, of course. As I told you, most of the activities of Big Jim's gang were concentrated in the fields of gambling and prostitution. But in 1920, America had a law new, a law that will change many things and will open a new door for gangs to make huge profits from. In 1920, a law was issued called the Prohibition Act, which lasted from 1920 to 1933. The Prohibition Act, which came to completely ban the manufacture, transport, and sale of alcohol in the United States. Meaning alcohol and liquor were considered prohibited substances, just like drugs. It is true that people in society were more tolerant of them in general, but legally they were prohibited. There were no longer any businesses that could be officially operated. There was no way to obtain alcohol except through the illegal business path and gangs. And right here, Johnny Torrio saw the opportunity and said we have to enter this field and be the first to take over it. But the problem is that the big leader, Big Jim, was against the idea and told him that he was satisfied with the businesses he had, gambling and prostitution. I was making a huge fortune from them, and I didn't need to get myself involved in another field that could cause me more problems. It seems that Big Jim is getting old in gang business, or at least he wasn't ready to occupy himself and enter new fields. A short time later, Al Capone brought up the same subject with Johnny Torrio. He went to him and said, "Brother, don't you want to enter the field of supplying and distributing alcohol? Our opportunity is now, since it has become prohibited, and the demand for it is greater and its prices are more expensive." Johnny Torrio answered, "I actually want to, but I brought up the subject with Big Jim, and he refused completely and refused to even discuss it with me." Al Capone sat thinking for a while, then patted his chest and said to him, "Okay, I have a solution." Johnny Torrio asked him, "What are you going to do?" Al Capone answered, "I will eliminate Big Jim, and you will take his place." Even Johnny Torrio was shocked at that moment. Meaning he said, this person is not normal. How does he want to eliminate or kill the big gang leader, the leader of their gang? He did not expect that Al Capone would be ready to go to such lengths. Big Jim is one of the biggest mafia leaders, a dangerous person. It is not good to play with him. But when Johnny sat thinking about the subject and began to imagine his position and how he would be if he was the leader of the gang and the one controlling the city, all these fantasies and dreams made the idea very tempting for Johnny Torrio. He actually gave the green light to Al Capone to begin the assassination of Big Jim.